What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable actors meets late-night television's most provocative host? You won't believe what unfolds when Nicolas Cage sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. This isn't your typical celebrity chat. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two entertainment titans go head-to-head in a battle that left audiences stunned and social media buzzing. The Late Show studio felt different that night. There was an electric tension in the air as Nicolas Cage made his entrance, his trademark intensity already visible in his measured steps and focused gaze. He'd come to promote his latest film, but anyone who knew Cage understood that interviews with the enigmatic actor rarely went according to script. Stephen Colbert, sitting behind his desk with that familiar smirk, seemed almost too eager to dive into what he clearly saw as an opportunity for memorable television. "Nicolas Cage, everybody," Colbert announced as the audience erupted in applause. Cage settled into the guest chair, his posture rigid, his eyes never leaving Colbert's face. There was something in his expression, a wariness that suggested he wasn't here to play the typical Hollywood promotion game. "Nicholas, great to have you back," Colbert began, his tone carrying that slight edge that regular viewers knew meant he was ready to push boundaries. "I have to ask, and I know our audience is dying to know, how do you choose your projects these days? Because, let's be honest, your filmography over the past few years has been eclectic." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Cage's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Eclectic," he repeated slowly, his voice carrying that distinctive cadence that could shift from whisper to roar without warning. "That's an interesting word choice, Stephen. Are you suggesting there's something wrong with an actor who refuses to be pigeonholed?" Colbert leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the immediate pushback. "Not at all, Nicholas. I'm just saying that going from national treasure to, well, some of your more recent direct-to-video work, it's quite a journey. Do you miss the big studio system? The major releases?" The question landed like a slap. Cage's eyes flashed, and for a moment the studio audience seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. The playful banter was already morphing into something more serious, more personal. "You know what I miss, Stephen?" Cage said, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that anyone familiar with his work would recognize as a warning sign. "I miss when interviewers did their homework instead of regurgitating gossip column narratives." Colbert's eyebrows shot up, but his smile never wavered. If anything, it grew wider. "Oh, I've done my homework, Nicholas. Trust me, I know all about your financial troubles, the tax issues, the castle you had to sell, the dinosaur skull you had to return to, the Mongolian government. That's not gossip, that's public record." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the light-hearted celebrity banter they'd expected. Cage's hands, which had been resting calmly on the chair's armrests, slowly curled into fists. "You want to talk about public records?" he said, his voice beginning to rise. "Let's talk about how the media loves to create narratives about people's lives based on incomplete information. Let's talk about how entertainment journalists build careers on tearing down the very people who make this industry possible." "Whoa, Nicholas," Colbert interjected, holding up his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes were gleaming with the kind of predatory satisfaction that comes from knowing you've struck a nerve. "I'm not trying to tear you down. I'm just asking questions our audience wants answered. They've supported your career for decades. Don't they deserve some honesty about where you've been lately?" "Honesty?" Cage's voice cracked like a whip. "You want honesty? Here's some honesty for you, Stephen. I've made over 100 films. I've won an Oscar. I've created characters that will outlive both of us. And you want to sit here and reduce My entire career to a punchline about direct-to-video movies and financial problems? The studio had gone completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away. Colbert, however, was in his element. He thrived on confrontation, on pushing his guests to their breaking points, for the sake of compelling television. I'm not reducing anything, Nicholas. I'm asking legitimate questions about career choices. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be in this business. Those words hit Cage like a physical blow. His entire body tensed, and when he spoke again, his voice carried 30 years of frustration with an industry that had alternately celebrated and mocked him. If I can't handle scrutiny? Stephen, I've been handling scrutiny since before you knew what a camera was. I've been dissected, analyzed, parodied, and dismissed by people who wouldn't last 5 minutes trying to do what I do. And you're going to sit there and question my ability to handle criticism? The confrontation was escalating rapidly, but Colbert showed no signs of backing down. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice taking on that faux concerned tone that had become his trademark. Look, Nicholas, I'm not trying to upset you, but you have to admit that your recent career trajectory raises some questions. The memes, the internet jokes about your acting style, the straight-to-streaming releases. Surely you've noticed the shift in how people perceive your work. Cage stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. The audience gasped, audibly. Perception, he said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his legendary intensity. You want to talk about perception? The perception is that I'm some kind of joke because I commit fully to every role I take, because I refuse to phone it in, even when the budget is low or the script isn't perfect, because I still believe in the transformative power of cinema, even when everyone else has given up on anything that isn't a superhero franchise. But Colbert wasn't finished. He could see that he had Cage exactly where he wanted him, on the edge, vulnerable, ready to explode, and like a predator sensing wounded prey, he moved in for what he thought would be the killing blow. You know what, Nicholas? Colbert said, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. I think what's really happening here is that you're having trouble accepting that your time as a leading man is over. The industry has moved on, audiences have moved on, and maybe it's time you did too. Instead of clinging to this idea that you're some misunderstood artist, maybe you should embrace what you've actually become. A meme, a curiosity. Someone people watch, ironically. The words hit Cage like a series of physical blows. His face went through a rapid transformation. Shock, hurt, and then pure, unadulterated rage. A meme? He repeated, his voice barely contained. You think that's what 30 years of my life amounts to? You think that's what Ghost Rider means to people? What leaving Las Vegas meant? What Con Air and Face Off contributed to cinema? I think, Colbert continued, clearly savoring every moment of Cage's distress, that those movies were a long time ago, and what people remember now is the shouting, the over-the-top delivery, the videos that go viral for all the wrong reasons. And honestly, maybe that's not such a bad thing. At least people are still talking about you. Cage's hands were shaking now, not with fear but with the effort of containing decades of frustration. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said, his voice growing more dangerous with each word. You sit behind this desk every night, making jokes, tearing people down for entertainment, and you think that gives you the right to judge my life's work? To reduce everything I've created to internet fodder? The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't television anymore. This was personal. Colbert, however, seemed intoxicated by the chaos he'd created. Nicholas, I'm not judging your life's work. I'm just acknowledging reality. And the reality is that your last genuinely successful film was probably 15 years ago. Everything since then has been, well, let's call it what it is. Desperation. That single word, desperation, seemed to break something fundamental inside Cage. His entire body went rigid, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of controlled fury that comes from a lifetime of professional criticism. Desperation, he repeated slowly. You want to know about desperation, Stephen? Desperation is sitting in that chair every night, desperately trying to be relevant by destroying other people. Desperation is building your entire career on negativity and cruelty disguised as humor. Colbert's composure finally began to crack. Hey now, that's not fair. Fair? Cage exploded, his voice filling every corner of the studio. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I came here tonight to talk about my work, my passion, my latest project, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to humiliate me? Is it fair that you've turned what should have been a conversation between professionals into a public execution? The host tried to regain control, his media training kicking in. Nicholas, you're overreacting. This is how interviews work. We ask tough questions. Tough questions? Cage cut him off, his legendary intensity now fully unleashed. These aren't tough questions, Stephen. These are character assassinations, dressed up as journalism. You're not interested in my answers. You're interested in my reactions. You're interested in creating a moment that will go viral, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. Colbert's mask was starting to slip, revealing something uglier underneath. Look, if you can't handle the heat of a simple talk show interview, maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Maybe the problem is that you've been living in a bubble for so long that you've forgotten what honest criticism sounds like. Honest criticism? Cage's voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. There's nothing honest about what you're doing. You're not a critic. You're a parasite. You feed off other people's vulnerabilities, their insecurities, their pain, and you package it as entertainment for people who are too cowardly to create anything themselves. The cameramen exchanged nervous glances. The producers in the booth were frantically discussing whether to cut to commercial. But the confrontation had taken on a life of its own, spiraling completely beyond anyone's control. Colbert, realizing he'd pushed too far but unable to back down without losing face, doubled down on his aggression. You know what, Nicholas? You're right. I am packaging this as entertainment. Because that's what you've become. Entertainment. Not the good kind, not the kind that inspires or moves people, but the kind that makes people laugh at you, not with you. And if you can't see that, if you can't accept that your legacy is more about the memes than the movies, then you're more delusional than I thought. Those words landed with devastating precision. Cage stood frozen for a moment, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. The rage was still there, but it was now mixed with something else: disappointment, disgust, and a cold determination that was somehow more frightening than his earlier explosions. My legacy, he said quietly, his voice carrying more menace in its restraint than it had in all his shouting. You want to talk about legacy, Stephen? Let me tell you what my legacy is. My legacy is that I never gave up. I never stopped trying. I never stopped believing that movies could be more than just products, that performances could be more than just mechanical repetitions of what worked before. I took risks. I failed sometimes, yes, but I failed while trying to create something genuine, something real. He took a step closer to Colbert's desk, his presence suddenly overwhelming. But your legacy? Your legacy is going to be this moment. This interview where you revealed exactly who you really are. Not the clever comedian, not the insightful interviewer, but a small, bitter man who gets his kicks from tearing down people who actually put themselves on the line for their art. Colbert was beginning to look genuinely uncomfortable for the first time in the interview. He could sense that he'd lost control of the situation, that Cage had somehow flipped the script. Nicholas, I think we should— No, Cage interrupted, his voice cutting through Colbert's attempt at damage control like a blade. We're not done here. You wanted to make this personal? Fine. Let's make it personal. You've spent your entire career hiding behind characters, behind personas, behind the safety of scripted material. You've never had to put yourself out there, the way actors do. You've never had to bare your soul on camera and hope that people understand what you're trying to say. The confrontation had reached a critical mass. Both men were now fully committed to destroying each other, and the audience could sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Colbert's face had gone pale, but his ego wouldn't let him surrender. You know what, Nicholas? You're absolutely right. I do hide behind characters and scripts, but at least I'm good at it. At least people still want to see what I do next. Can you say the same? When was the last time anyone actually anticipated a Nicolas Cage movie? When was the last time your name on a poster meant anything other than, "This is going to be weird"? The words hung in the air like poison gas. Cage's eyes went completely still, a deadly calm settling over his features that was somehow more terrifying than all his previous outbursts combined. "Stephen," he said, his voice now carrying the quiet intensity of a man who had nothing left to lose, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this is the moment where you get to choose who you really are." He moved closer to the desk, his presence filling the space between them. "You can keep going down this path. You can keep trying to humiliate me, keep trying to tear me down for the entertainment of your audience. But if you do, if you say one more word designed to hurt me, I'm going to do something that will haunt you for the rest of your career." Colbert, sensing genuine danger but unable to back down, made the fatal mistake of smirking. "Oh, really? And what's that, Nicholas? Are you going to give me the full Cage treatment? Are you going to shout at me some more? Maybe throw one of your legendary tantrums?" The mocking tone was the final straw. Cage's transformation was instantaneous and complete. His voice, when he spoke, carried 30 years of accumulated fury, disappointment, and artistic passion. "No, Stephen, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell your audience exactly what kind of person you really are." He turned to face the cameras directly, his intensity now focused like a laser beam. "Ladies and gentlemen, you think you know Stephen Colbert. You think he's this charming, witty host who asks the tough questions. But what you've witnessed tonight is something else entirely. You've seen a man who invited me onto his show not to discuss my work, not to have a conversation, but to publicly humiliate me for your entertainment." Colbert tried to interrupt, but Cage's voice overpowered him completely. "This man researched my financial troubles, my personal struggles, my lowest moments, and he brought me here tonight to mock them. He brought me here to turn my pain into your laughter. And when I tried to defend myself, when I tried to maintain some dignity, he doubled down. He called me desperate. He called me a meme. He told me my legacy was worthless." The studio audience was transfixed. Some were nodding in agreement, others looked uncomfortable, but none could look away. Cage continued, his voice building to a crescendo. "But here's what Stephen doesn't understand. Here's what he's never understood. Art isn't about being safe. It's not about being cool or maintaining your image. It's about being willing to fail spectacularly in pursuit of something real. And yes, I've failed. I've made movies that didn't work. I've given performances that people mocked. I've taken risks that didn't pay off." He turned back to Colbert, who was now visibly shaken. "But you know what I've never done, Stephen? I've never used my platform to deliberately hurt someone. I've never invited someone onto a show just to tear them down. I've never mistaken cruelty for cleverness." Colbert finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "Nicholas, I was just doing my job. This is what late-night television is supposed to be." "No!" Cage roared, his voice echoing through the studio. "This is what you have made late-night television. This is what happens when you mistake cynicism for insight, when you think that tearing people down makes you seem smart. You've poisoned the well, Stephen. You've turned what should be a celebration of creativity into a gladiator arena where artists come to be slaughtered for the amusement of the masses. The audience was beginning to shift uncomfortably. Some were starting to boo, but it wasn't clear if they were booing Cage or Colbert. The host, realizing that he was losing control not just of the interview, but of his own show, made one last desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. "You're being incredibly unfair, Nicholas. I've had thousands of guests on this show, and they've all been treated with respect." "Respect?" Cage cut him off, his voice cracking with emotion. "You call what happened here tonight respect? You brought up my tax problems, my personal finances, my lowest professional moments, and you did it all with a smile on your face. You turned my life into a punchline, and when I objected, you told me I was being too sensitive." He took a deep breath, seeming to gather himself for one final assault. "But you know what the real tragedy is, Stephen? The real tragedy is that there are young actors watching this show tonight. There are people who dream of making movies, of telling stories, of creating something meaningful. And what you've taught them is that success means nothing, that artistic integrity is worthless, that in the end you'll be judged not by your best work, but by your worst moments." Colbert was now visibly shaking, his composure completely shattered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to make good television." "Good television?" Cage's voice was now filled with disgust. "You think this is good television? You think destroying someone's dignity on national television is good? You think making your audience complicit in public humiliation is entertainment?" He moved toward the edge of the stage, his decision clearly made. "Well, Stephen, you got your good television. You got your viral moment. You got your ratings. But you also got something else. You got to show the world exactly who you are when you think nobody's watching. And that, my friend, is going to follow you for the rest of your career." Colbert made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Nicholas, please. Let's start over. Let's talk about your new movie. "No," Cage said simply, his voice now calm but final. "We're done here. I came here tonight to share my passion for cinema with your audience. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who thinks cruelty is comedy. I won't be part of this anymore." He began walking toward the exit, but then stopped and turned back one final time. "You know what's really sad, Stephen? You're actually talented. You could have been somebody who elevated the medium, who used your platform to celebrate creativity, instead of destroying it. But you chose this instead. You chose to be the guy who kicks people when they're down and calls it entertainment." The studio fell into complete silence as Cage reached the exit. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, and delivered his final words with devastating precision. "Enjoy your ratings, Stephen. I hope they're worth what you've become." And, with that, Nicolas Cage walked out of the Late Show studio, leaving behind a stunned audience, a shattered host, and a confrontation that would be remembered as one of the most brutal and honest moments in late-night television history. The cameras kept rolling as Colbert sat in his chair, speechless, while the audience slowly began to process what they had just witnessed. The show that was supposed to be routine publicity had become something else entirely, a masterclass in the difference between authentic passion and manufactured controversy, between genuine talent and hollow cynicism. And in the end, it was clear to everyone in that studio who had won this battle of wills, who had maintained their dignity, and who would wake up the next morning having to explain to the world why they had chosen cruelty over compassion.